The following is rated TV MALSV. It contains strong language, violence, and nudity. It is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion advised.
What should I do if I find myself in a conversation with a history buff that goes over my head?
I want you to look right at the person and do this right here. They ask you something about the past. You say, I don't really care for slavery.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Yes, oh my God. Oh, yeah.
It works every damn time. That's what I do when I'm sitting around a bunch of socialites and they start talking about the past and stuff. That's my line. I just say it and walk off. I have my little drink in my hand. I just say it and walk off. I don't really care for slavery and walk off and leave them sitting. I don't give a damn if they talking about Christopher Columbus. I don't give a damn if they talking about a treaty. I don't give a damn about an amendment, a bill. I don't care what the subject is. It could be prohibition. I don't care what the subject is. When you get through saying it, and I don't know what the hell you talking about, my favorite line is, I don't give a damn about slavery. And
I'll keep my head up, and you will end this.
I'm just getting warmed up. This is von Clausewitz shit. Total fucking war. I'm gonna pull the whole thing down. I'm gonna bring the whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's gonna be biblical.
So we have some of our people here who think then that slavery was back then and had nothing to do, and had nothing to do with them. Ladies and gentlemen, we've never escaped slavery. We still share the slave consciousness of our great-great-grandparents. We are of the same mind to a great extent that they were. We have not advanced beyond these people. How can I say that? I generally ask a series of questions. You say that slavery has nothing to do with you and slavery was back there. And I ask you the question then, what language do you speak? When did you learn that language? Was that the language African people were speaking when we were taken into slavery in America? In other words, the language we speak at this moment is what? A slave language. The language that our slave ancestors were forced to learn. And we still speak it, and you can still hear the pidgin, the Creole, and the other kinds of stuff in our language right at this moment that they had to go through. That language, with its words defined by history and by an experience, is the language we use today to guide our behavior. It's the language we use today to talk to ourselves. It's the language we use today to learn about ourselves and to learn about the world. It's the language today we use to try to understand ourselves. Is there no wonder then that we are still confused? So we have not escaped slavery because we are still using a slave language, and we speak the language of slaves. What kind of food do you eat? You say soul food? Was that the food of African people? Slave food. The food that we find most satisfying, the food that we find that sticks to our ribs, the food that we call down home, a food that we learn to eat in the quarters. And yet we dare say that we have escaped slavery. that we have nothing to do with those people back there, that was back there. When our whole very social life and social relationships, our very definition of ourselves as a people, our very attempt to commune with ourselves is mediated by the food of slaves. Understand what I'm trying to get at? And how can you say that you exist in a different consciousness from another people? What kind of uniforms are we wearing? Huh? What kind of clothes are we wearing? Were these the clothes of African people? Huh? This is what we got to look at. Yes. What is this to say then that we've escaped slavery? What kind of names do we respond to? Yes. Yes. Tamikas and all these other things we got going out here. What kind of names do we identify with? Why is it that African names sound strange to us now as a people, and yet we dare say that we have a different consciousness from our great slave grandparents? How can we say that? We are still of the same consciousness, and we are still in the same position because we are still servants of the white man. And our reason for being in America is to serve white folk and to generate wealth for them. And there has been no change at all in terms of our relationship to these people. The values that we pursue are slave values and the values of servants. The social relations that we create and interact with were built and developed during the periods of slavery. We have not escaped it at all. But it is time for us to change the slave consciousness, this consciousness of servitude that is still too much with us today. And ultimately, we ask the question that's closest to home for a lot of people. When we claim that we've escaped slavery, and the slavery was something back there which had nothing to do with us today. And then I ask you the question, what kind of God do you worship? What's the name of it? Who taught you to praise him? Was this the God you were praying to before you were brought to these shores? Was this the religion you had before you were brought to these shores? Can you name one African God? How can you then, who define yourself, the very essence of yourself and the very essence of your soul, and organize the very nature of your life here on earth, based on a God handed to us by our slave masters, claim that you have no slave consciousness and are not related to slavery? In other words, then, ladies and gentlemen, we are not Africans. We are possessed by spirits and demons. We have let another people's spirit take possession of our bodies and take possession of our minds. When we speak, it is not with our African voice. It is with the voice of that demonic presence that uses our lips to speak its own language. Yes. Yes, and we have to recognize this. We are possessed. And if we are to transform ourselves and to transform the nature of our relationship with those who are our masters, we must engage in an exorcism and clear the devils out of our minds.
The 13th Amendment reads, slavery is abolished except when you are found guilty of a crime and go to jail. So prison is the slave plantation. And look at all the things that are denied you in jail is the same things that were denied Africans on the plantation. Slavery still is very much alive.
Today, there are more African American adults under correctional control in prison or jail on probation or parole than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. Crime and crime rates did not drive mass incarceration to begin with. Incarceration rates have fluctuated over the years, gone up, gone down. Today, are actually at historical lows, but incarceration rates, especially Black incarceration rates, have consistently soared regardless of whether crime is going up or going down in any given community or the nation as a whole. War on drugs, which has been a major engine of mass incarceration, has targeted poor communities of color, especially Black and brown men, even though studies have consistently shown now for decades that people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than white.
Before 1964, the prison rate in America, the majority of people in prison were white people, were white guys. But the thing is, there was no need to have a strong police presence in the Black community because Black people were already controlled by the basic laws of the land. Black people were already controlled by Jim Crow laws, signs saying Black people drink from this water fountain, Black people couldn't live in this neighborhood. So Black people were just controlled, period, at that time. Now, after the Civil Rights Bill passed in 1964, this is when the police presence became very strong in the Black community, because the average citizen couldn't control Black people like they could before then. So they came up with another strategy and had law enforcement do it. So around 1964-65, Black communities were flooded with law enforcement. And this is why the Black Panthers was started, because of the police brutality that had started in the Black community.
Prisoners themselves represent a small percentage of the population under correctional control. Like today, there's about 7.6 million people under correctional control, but only about 1.3 million are in prison of that. The rest are on probation, parole, in jail, overwhelmingly for minor nonviolent offenses and drug offenses. The problem is that even if you don't get prison time, even if you're lucky enough to get just felony probation, you're saddled for the rest of your life with a felony record. And so the question isn't, in my view, just who's in prison. The question is who is branded a criminal or felon and must live with that label for the rest of their lives.
The people said, well, if we don't need Black labor anymore, what do we do with it? Well, we have to set up a system in the commercial system, or at least incorporate Black people into the commercial system so that they make us money without having to do the labor of picking cotton or picking sugar cane or whatever. We already passed that. So how do we make a more sophisticated plantation where we can keep slaves? Well, let's criminalize pretty much every damn thing that we do. There are over 1 million laws on the books now. Who needs 1 million laws? Unless you want to control people's behavior.
The police presence has always been in the Black community because we are prisoners of war. That's number one. The original police were created to catch slaves. They were slave catchers. There was no need to police a white society. There was no need for that in early America. There was no need for that. Police even became wild when police were always about guarding property. That's what the police are about, guarding property. That's it. Their job gets stretched out to a moral responsibility and public safety and that kind of thing later on in their development. But the original concept of a police officer is to make sure your property stays with you. They are hired by the rich, first of all, to protect the rich's property.
And yet we wonder why despite all of our prayers, despite all of our devotion, we still suffer the way we do. I often ask the question, why is it that the people who prayed the most have the most of their children in the jails of America today? Who shout and kick over the benches and so forth, are filling up the prisons and have the children killing each other and addicted out here in these streets. There must be a problem here, ladies and gentlemen. We must reorient ourselves to our religion. We must reorient ourselves to our God.
Voodoo man, chicken bone, I can make a thunderstorm from a light rain. My ears start ringing, my nose get bloody. I feel a little bit of pressure on my right brain. Intermission transmission put me in submission. Glistening, trapped in the light prison, whistling. The Christ told me come closer to the light, man. I went blind, woke up in front of a mic stand. Voodoo man, tap dancing in the French Quarter, walking on water with a scroll in my hand. The blueprints for a dish-shaped light vessel that was chiseled out of metal off the coast of Japan. Fasting on the top of a mountain out into postland, saw a shiny object floating out of the ocean. I'm sort of like a postman. You can get the message if you want to understand from the raps
On
and the
November
man.
7th, saw this disc-shaped object floating above the sea concourse of the
Voodoo
United
man,
Airlines.
civilized and savage, criticized
very
the
low in
parish,
the
spreading
sky.
false
There was still
doctrine, terrorized the
daylight, very
cleric, carrying
distinct.
on nonsense, specialized lies to
Didn't
paralyze
look like
the
an airplane,
conscience.
a helicopter,
Voodoo
or
man,
anything
chit
else.
chatter, abracadabra, spitting out matter while I'm shitting out data. Chew them up, shitting out rappers, sipping Pellegrino while I'm giving out matches. Set yourself on fire, let the wisdom of Elijah purify you. Take a nigga higher, sold your soul to the highest. By you now, you're on the wire. You're talking about 2-foot tires, saying you sell crack, clapping at cats with Max, but you a liar. Pants on fire, same old rugged cross, different crucified Messiah.